The oncology ward always smelled the same. Antiseptic layered over cafeteria coffee, layered over something sweeter and sadder that no one ever named out loud. I'd grown used to it over my 2 years volunteering at Mercy General. Unpaid, unofficial, invisible. Rosa. Charge Nurse Delgado slid a clipboard across the station without looking up. Room 412 needs the evening round. Vitals logged, patient hasn't touched her dinner tray. 3rd night running. I tucked the clipboard under my arm and checked my watch. 7:14 p.m. I had exactly 40 minutes before the last crosstown bus, and if I missed it, I was walking 40 blocks home in January. I couldn't afford the cab. Couldn't afford most things, actually. My bank app had shown $31.07 this morning, and rent was due in 4 days. The volunteer stipend, if you could even call the $150 monthly transit card a stipend, barely covered the bus fare that got me here. I did this because my mother had died in a ward like this one, alone, while someone like me had been too busy to sit with her. I couldn't fix that, but I could sit with other people's mothers. I thought of my daughter Camille, 7 years old, probably doing homework at Mrs. Petrov's kitchen table right now, wearing the sneakers with the cracked sole I'd been meaning to replace for 3 weeks. Soon, I told myself, the same word I always used when I didn't have a better answer. I am Rosa DeLuca, hospital volunteer, part-time pharmacy cashier, full-time single mother. I moved to New York from a small town outside Naples when I was 19, following a man who left before Camille was born. What I kept from that chapter of my life, my daughter, my Italian, and an absolute refusal to let anyone see me break. I started down the hall toward room 412. The head nurse had flagged the patient's file 3 days ago with a single handwritten note clipped to the front. Family involved. Be professional. Do not engage beyond clinical necessity. I had noticed the note. I had also noticed what it didn't say, who the family was. I found out the hard way on my first evening in the ward, when I'd rounded the corner and nearly walked into a wall of black-suited men lining the corridor outside 412. 6 of them, standing the way men stand when they are being paid to be frightening. I had turned around and asked Delgado quietly. She'd looked at me with an expression that suggested I had just asked whether fire was hot. "That's Silvio Maranzano's mother," she'd said. "Don't make eye contact, don't make conversation. Just do the vitals and leave." I had nodded. Of course I had. That was 3 days ago. Tonight, I picked up the untouched dinner tray outside room 412, straightened my volunteer badge, and knocked twice before I stepped inside. The woman in the bed was smaller than I'd expected. I don't know what I had imagined. Something formidable, I suppose, commensurate with the men who guarded her door. But Giuliana Maranzano was 81 years old, and she had the hands of someone who had kneaded bread her whole life, and she was staring at the wall with the settled expression of a person who had already made a decision and was simply waiting for everyone else to accept it. The dinner tray was cold. I set it on the bedside table and reached for the blood pressure cuff. "You can leave that," she said, in Italian. I paused. It wasn't unusual for patients to refuse vitals. It was unusual for them to do it in Neapolitan dialect, the particular rounded vowels of the province I'd grown up 30 kilometers outside of. I responded without thinking. "Ho ancora bisogno di controllare la pressione, signora. Solo un minuto." "I still need to check your pressure, signora. Just a minute." The silence that followed was different from the silence before it. She turned her head. She looked at me, actually looked at me, for the first time since I had been assigned her room. Her eyes were dark and very sharp, which is how you can tell when an old woman is still entirely present inside a failing body. "Where are you from?" she said. Still Italian. "Outside Avellino," I said. "A small town. You wouldn't know it." "Try me," I told her. She made a sound that in Naples means, of course, naturally, the world is smaller than fools believe. Then she extended her arm for the blood pressure cuff without being asked. I was wrapping the cuff when the door opened. I knew before I turned around. The quality of the silence changed. The way a room changes when someone with authority walks into it. The suited men outside had not announced him because they didn't need to. He walked like someone who had never once in his adult life needed to announce himself. I had seen photographs. The newspapers ran them occasionally without comment, because commenting required a level of courage most editors didn't possess. Silvio Maranzano was 53 years old, built like someone who had worked with his hands before he worked with other people's fear, and he was looking at me with the focused stillness of a man cataloging a discrepancy. His mother's arm was extended. She was cooperating. The blood pressure cuff read 148/92. I logged it without looking up. "She's been refusing the evening vitals," he said quietly. "To me, not to her." "She allowed them tonight," I said. Also quietly. Another silence. I capped the pen, replaced the cuff, and reached for the tray. "Leave the tray," the old woman said, in Italian, "and come back tomorrow." I glanced at Silvio Maranzano. He was still watching me with that cataloging expression. "Good night, signora," I said, and walked to the door. Behind me, I heard him ask his mother very quietly in the same dialect, "Who is she?" And I heard her answer, also quietly in a tone I recognized, the tone of a woman who has decided something. "Someone useful. Don't frighten her away." He was waiting by my locker at the end of my shift. Not him personally, a man in a suit, which amounted to the same thing. He was holding an envelope the way people hold things they already know you're going to take. "Mr. Maranzano would like a word," he said. It was not a request. The phrasing was polite, the way a locked door is polite. I said I had a bus to catch. The man in the suit said a car was available. I said I needed to call my daughter's sitter. The man in the suit said, "Of course, take your time. The car would wait." The room where they brought me wasn't a hospital room. It was the private consultation suite on the 4th floor. The one with the mahogany table and the donor plaques on the wall, which I had previously assumed existed only for board meetings. Silvio Maranzano was already seated, jacket on, no coffee, no pretense of hospitality. He gestured to the chair across from him. I sat. He placed a folder on the table and opened it to the first page. It was my personnel file, volunteer intake form, emergency contact, Camille DeLuca, age 7, relationship, daughter, address listed, Mrs. Petrov's number listed, my pharmacy shifts listed. I felt the specific cold of being known by someone who has not asked your permission. "You spoke Italian with my mother," he said. "She initiated it. She has refused to speak to anyone in this hospital for 11 days, including 3 specialists I flew in from Milan." He turned a page. "You're from outside Avellino?" "Yes. My mother is from Nola, 40 kilometers away." He closed the folder. "She has stage 4 pancreatic cancer. She has refused treatment. She has refused the experimental protocol from the specialist at Sloan Kettering. She has refused the clinical trial my people arranged in Zurich." He said it evenly, without inflection, which is how I knew it cost him considerably. "My mother has decided she is done. She would like to die in peace, and I cannot—" He stopped. He was not a man who said "I cannot" often. You could tell. "I would like you to continue working with her," he said. "Not as a volunteer, as a paid private caregiver assigned exclusively to her, evenings and afternoons. I have other shifts. They'll be compensated, whatever the differential is, plus additional." He named a number. Monthly. The cold in my chest became something more complicated. It was 6 times what I made at the pharmacy. It was Camille's cracked sneaker sole and the 3 weeks of soon disappearing in one sentence. "I'm not a nurse," I said carefully. "I'm a volunteer. There are licensed—" "She spoke to you." She extended her arm. He looked at me levelly. "I have hired nurses. I have hired specialists. I have offered her everything that can be bought. She is not interested in being treated. She is interested, apparently, in being spoken to." A pause. "In Italian, by someone from 40 kilometers away from where she was born." There was a large man standing near the door. He wasn't doing anything threatening. He was simply present in the way that clarifies that the door is a formality. "Refusing isn't actually an option, is it?" I said. For the first time, Something shifted in his face. Not quite respect, more like the recognition one navigator has for another. "My mother asked for you by name," he said. "That has never happened before. I am asking you to come back tomorrow." I thought of Camille's sneakers. I thought of the bus I'd already missed. "I want the arrangement in writing," I said, "and I keep my pharmacy shifts." He nodded once, immediately, as though he had already anticipated this and found it acceptable. "Tomorrow," he said. 4:00. They moved Juliana to the private wing the next morning. I had seen the private wing once, on a facilities tour during my volunteer orientation. Gleaming floors, fresh flowers changed every other day, rooms with actual windows instead of the reinforced glass slits of the main ward. The kind of care that made you understand, concretely, what money was. Her room had a window looking over the East River. The flowers were white and uncomplicated. Someone had brought photographs in silver frames and arranged them on the windowsill. Old photographs, the kind printed on thick paper that meant something. Juliana was sitting up in bed when I arrived at 4, which was already an improvement from the previous day's reports. She was wearing her own nightgown instead of a hospital gown. Her hair had been brushed. A woman I hadn't seen before, mid-50s, professional, the specific composure of someone who had worked in proximity to power for a long time, intercepted me at the door. "Signora Fiorelli," she said, "I manage the household arrangements. If you need anything for the patient, you come to me. Your transport has been arranged, a car morning and evening. Your daughter's school pickup will be covered on the days your shifts run long. Mrs. Petrov has been informed." I stood very still for a moment. He arranged my daughter's school pickup. As a precaution, in case of schedule conflicts. Her expression was neutral. It was meant to be a convenience. It was meant to demonstrate gently how thoroughly he already understood my life. "Thank you," I said, because there was no useful alternative. The room they had arranged for me to use during long shifts was down the hall, small, clean, a cot and a table, bigger than my first apartment in New York. I set my bag on the chair and stood in it for a moment before going in to see her. Juliana looked at me when I came in and said in Neapolitan, "You're back." I said I would be. "People say many things." She gestured at the chair beside the bed. "Sit. I'm tired of people standing over me. It feels like they're waiting for me to finish." I sat. I did not produce a clipboard or a cuff or a chart. "Tell me about Avellino," she said. So I did. I told her about the valley in autumn, the chestnut festivals, the particular way fog sits in the lower streets in November. She listened with her eyes half closed, and after 20 minutes she told me about Nola, the festival of the obelisks, the smell of the harbor in summer, her mother's kitchen. She fell asleep mid-sentence, peacefully, for the first time in 11 days. Signora Fiorelli documented it in the nursing log at my request. I did not feel safe. Safe was not the right word for sitting in a room full of silver-framed photographs while large men stood outside the door. But I thought of Camille and the sneakers, and I stayed. By the end of the first week, I understood why the specialists from Milan had failed. Juliana Maranzano was not confused, not in denial, not irrational. She had simply performed a clear-eyed audit of her remaining life and reached a conclusion that her son found unacceptable. She knew the cancer was stage 4. She had read every report. She had done what 81-year-old women who have buried husbands and raised dangerous sons sometimes do. She had decided. What she had not done, in 11 days in this hospital, was talk to anyone who let her. Every specialist had arrived with a solution. Every nurse had arrived with a task. Well, even her son arrived with money, which is its own kind of solution. No one had arrived with patience and 40 kilometers of shared geography. I arrived with both. I didn't argue with her about treatment. I asked her what she was afraid of, and she said in the blunt way of old Neapolitan women that she was not afraid of dying, but of dying badly, in pain, in machinery, watched by strangers. I asked her what dying well looked like. She told me, at home, in a bed she recognized, with the window open, with someone to talk to who didn't require anything from her. I said I understood. She looked at me carefully. You lost someone, she said. Not a question. My mother, I said. In a ward like this one. She died alone because I couldn't get the time off work. A silence. Then she said, what did she like to talk about? And I told her. And somehow in the telling we arrived, gently, sideways, without announcement, at the topic of what was still possible. Not the Swiss trial, not the experimental protocol, but a palliative plan that would let her go home, a compromise between her son's grief and her own dignity. If I agreed to the palliative management, she said carefully, the pain protocol, not the intervention. That would be your choice, I said, and I think it's a reasonable one. Would you be there? She looked at the window. Not the nurses, you. As much as I'm allowed to be, I said honestly. She was quiet for a long moment. Tell Silvio, she said finally. Tell him I'll speak to the doctor, the palliative one, not the other ones. I delivered the message to Signora Fiorelli that evening, who relayed it upward. 40 minutes later, Silvio Maranzano appeared in the doorway of the family consultation room where I was waiting to leave. He looked like a man who had been handed something he had stopped believing he would receive. He didn't thank me. He stood in the doorway for a moment, and then he said quietly, whatever you need, for your daughter, for your apartment, name it. I need her to feel heard every day, I said. That's what she needs. He looked at me for a long moment with the cataloging expression, recalibrating. Tomorrow, he said. Same time. His associates, I noticed, were watching me differently as I left. Not with suspicion, with something more like reluctant reassessment. He came alone on a Thursday evening, which was unusual. The men were in the hall, but he dismissed them with a word and sat in the chair beside his mother's bed while she slept. And I was doing quiet paperwork at the small table when he said, without looking up, you know who I am. Yes, I said. And yet you came back. Your mother asked me to? A pause. Outside, the river was dark and the lights of Brooklyn were beginning to come on. She told me about your mother, he said, how she died. I set down my pen. She had no right to tell you that. She had every right. She's dying. She says what she wants. He said it without apology, but also without cruelty. She said you understand what it is to watch someone leave before you're ready. I looked at him. He was not looking at me. He was looking at his mother's sleeping face with an expression that had nothing to do with the men outside the door, or the newspaper photographs, or the things I knew he was. The things everyone knew. She's not leaving yet, I said. The palliative protocol buys time. Good time if we manage it correctly. I know. He was quiet. I've been buying her time for 3 years. Every specialist, every trial, He stopped. Started again differently. She told me last year she was tired of being a project. I didn't listen. I said nothing. Sometimes the most useful thing is silence with company in it. My father died when I was 9, he said. She raised me and my brother alone in a neighborhood that ate boys like us. She made us go to school. She made us go to mass. A pause. We did not end up where she hoped. She doesn't seem to regret you, I said carefully. No. Something moved across his face. That is the thing I cannot explain. After everything I've become, she looks at me the same way. He turned, finally, and looked at me directly. What is that? How does a person do that? I thought of Camille, 7 years old, asking me last month why I always came home smelling like the hospital. I had said because I help people there. She had said, that's good, Mama, and returned to her drawing. I think it's just love, I said. The kind that's already decided. It doesn't add conditions. He was very still. My daughter looks at me like that, I said. I don't deserve it either. A long silence. Then, unexpectedly, how old is she? 7. My son is 8. He said it quietly. Like a card placed face up on the table, not as information, as equivalent. His mother died 4 years ago, lung cancer. She was 39. He looked back at the window. So I do understand, actually. Watching someone leave before you're ready. The room was very quiet. The monitor beeped softly. His mother's breathing was even and slow. For one strange moment, I thought, looking at him. He wasn't the man the newspapers photographed leaving courthouses, and I wasn't a volunteer on a contract I hadn't fully agreed to. We were just two people who had lost someone and were trying not to lose someone else. I picked up my pen. He did not leave for another hour. I noticed the orderly on my 9th day. His name badge said Marco, and he was new to the private wing, transferred from the 3rd floor. But according to the staff rotation board, he moved correctly and efficiently and smiled at the right moments. He was also, I noticed, the only person who ever lingered in the corridor outside Juliana's room without a visible task. I noticed because I linger too sometimes, and I know what purposeful lingering looks like versus its counterfeit. I did not say anything. I was a volunteer. I had no standing to say anything, and I was already aware that I existed in a delicate balance, useful to the old woman, tolerated by the men in the hallway, observed carefully by Silvio Maranzano. On the 11th day, Juliana told me that one of the nurses had asked her, very pleasantly, about her medication schedule, which medications, at what times, administered by whom. That's standard, I said carefully. She asked 3 times, Juliana said. Different ways. I'm old, not dim. That evening I mentioned it to Signora Fiorelli, framed as a general observation about documentation protocols. Her expression didn't change, but she made a note. 2 days later, a different incident. I arrived to find Juliana's afternoon medications had been adjusted, a small change to the pain management timing. No one had told me. The chart amendment was initialed by a staff pharmacist I didn't recognize. I checked the change against the palliative protocol Dr. Anand had established. It was technically within range. It was also designed, if you understood palliative pharmacology, to create a window, a gap in the sedation cycle, a period where an additional medication could be introduced without the regular nursing team noticing an interaction. I stood at the nursing station for a very long time, looking at the chart. I thought, I could be wrong. I am not a pharmacist. I am a volunteer with 2 years of watching. I also thought, his mother has refused treatment from every specialist he's trusted, and she is drinking tea and talking to me about the chestnut harvest, and someone has just created a window in her sedation schedule. I took a photograph of the chart amendment with my phone. I did not confront anyone. I did not go to the charge nurse, who I did not know well enough to trust. I went instead to Signora Fiorelli's office, knocked once, and placed my phone on her desk face up. I think you need to show this to him, I said. Tonight. She looked at it. Something happened behind her composed face. Go back to the patient, she said quietly. Don't leave her room. I went back to the room. I sat in the chair beside Juliana's bed. I did not tell her anything. I held her hand when she offered it, and I thought, I believed the danger was the diagnosis. I was wrong about where it was coming from. Outside, I heard quiet, urgent footsteps moving quickly toward the elevator. He came at midnight. I was still in the chair. I had not left. Juliana was asleep. The room was lit only by the monitor light and the distant glow of the river. Silvio Maranzano opened the door without knocking, which told me the threshold rules had changed. He looked at me for a moment. The chair, the vigil, the fact of my still being there, and something crossed his face that I don't have clean language for. You stayed, he said. She was asleep, I said. I didn't want to leave her. He crossed to the bed. He looked at his mother's face for a long time, and his expression was the unguarded version of the one he wore in consultation rooms, stripped of the professional control, just a son looking at his mother. The pharmacist, he said quietly. He was employed by Nico Ferrante, a rival family. They believed that if my mother died here, under care I had arranged in circumstances that could be questioned, he stopped. It would discredit my operations at a sensitive time. They were going to use her, I said. Flatly, because it needed to be said plainly. Yes. Juliana's breathing was even and calm. She was unaware. She had been protected without knowing she needed protecting. "You didn't have to stay," he said. "Your shift ended at 9. "I know. Why did you?" I looked at his mother's hands, the bread-kneading hands. The hands that had held a family together in a neighborhood that ate boys like him. "Because she asked me to come back tomorrow," I said. "I take that seriously." He was very still for a long moment. Then he turned and opened the door. One of his men stepped in. Silvio spoke quietly, in Sicilian dialect I only partially followed, but I caught the shape of it. "She is under my personal protection. Any shift change in this wing requires my direct approval. Any unfamiliar face within 20 meters of this room answers to me." He came back to the bedside. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to understand that I am not making a contractual offer." He looked at me levelly. "I would like you to move to the private house when she transfers to home palliative care, as her primary companion. You and your daughter. And if that removes the logistics problem, there is room." The room was very quiet. The monitor beeped. "You should know," he said, "that I am aware this is an enormous ask. I am also aware that I'm not accustomed to asking. I'm asking." I looked at Juliana. She had told me on the 3rd day that she wanted to die in a bed she recognized with the window open. I could give her that. We could give her that. "I'll need to talk to Camille," I said. "Of course. And I keep my name, my decisions, my autonomy in her care." "Agreed." "Then I'll consider it," I said. "Seriously." He nodded once. He sat down in the second chair, the chair no one had used before, and stayed until morning. The pharmacist's name was Domenico Vita. He had credentials from 3 hospitals, and a reference letter I later learned had been fabricated. He had been placed 18 months earlier, not just in Mercy General but in 2 other facilities connected to Maranzano Family Care. A long-term operation, patient and invisible. I did not know most of this when I walked into the family consultation room 3 days later with the photograph on my phone and the chart amendment I had cross-referenced against Dr. Annan's original protocol, annotated in my own handwriting on a piece of graph paper from the pharmacy. What I had was this: a documented gap in the sedation cycle, a medication timing change initialed by a pharmacist no one could fully account for, and a pattern, 3 sequential shifts where Marco the orderly had been positioned outside Juliana's room within 30 minutes of the window opening. I spread the graph paper on the table. "I don't know who authorized the transfer," I said. "I don't know the organizational structure of what you're dealing with. I know pharmacology, and I know what this window was for, and I know that Marco was positioned to use it on the 14th, 16th, and 19th. He wasn't there on the 20th because I didn't leave the room." I said it quietly, without drama, the way you report a discrepancy in an inventory count. Silvio Maranzano looked at the graph paper. The 2 men beside him looked at the graph paper. One of them left the room without being told. Silvio studied the annotations for a long time. "You trained as a pharmacist?" he said. "I work the counter at a pharmacy. I read the literature because there's nothing else to do between customers." Something almost like a smile. Not quite. "The authorization came from inside," he said, not asking, confirming. "Someone on my medical payroll." "I think so. The signature on the transfer paperwork is a staff code, not a name. Someone who knew the system." "Ferrante," he said, very quietly. He did not shout. He did not break anything. He sat back and his eyes went to a middle distance, and the 2 men remaining in the room became very still, the way things become still before a significant change in weather. "You have until sunrise," he said, to no one in the room. I understood he was not speaking to me. I folded my graph paper, picked up my phone, and stood. "Your mother would like to go home by the end of the week," I said. "Dr. Anand thinks it's achievable if the transfer is managed carefully." "Make it happen," he said, not looking up. "Whatever you need." I left the room. The balance of something had shifted. I could feel it in the quality of the air, the way his men moved in the corridor. I was no longer the volunteer who had been usefully tolerated. I was something else now, something that didn't have a clean title but was recognized. Juliana was awake when I came back to the room. She looked at me and then out at the river and said, "It's settled, isn't it?" "Yes, Signora," I said. "I think it is." "Good," she said. "Tell me more about the Chestnut Festival." They sent the car for me on a Tuesday. I had not asked for it. Signora Fiorelli had texted, "Mr. Maranzano would like to speak with you. Car is outside." It was my day off. My actual day off. The one I spent at Camille's school for the winter art show, where she had painted a watercolor of a dog that was mostly orange but deeply felt. I went to the art show first. The car waited. Camille held up her painting and said, "Do you like it, Mama?" "It's the best dog I've ever seen," I said, and meant it. On the drive, I looked out the window and thought seriously about what I was considering. The invitation to move Camille and me into the private residence during Juliana's home palliative care. What it would mean. What it would cost, in the currency that doesn't have a number. I had left a man before, not a dangerous one, just an absent one, and rebuilt my life in a city that owed me nothing. And I had done it successfully enough that my daughter painted orange dogs with confidence and held them up for me to see. I was not interested in exchanging one form of dependence for another, was however well appointed. But I was also honest with myself, sitting in that car. The apartment was gray and safe and correct. The hospital ward was purposeful. And the room by the East River, where an old woman from 40 kilometers away from where I was born talked about her mother's kitchen while a monitor beeped softly, that had felt unexpectedly like something I was supposed to be doing. I am a person who takes seriously the places I'm supposed to be. I met him in the library of the private residence, which I had not seen before. He was standing, which meant he was uncertain, which I found humanizing. I sat down across from him and said, "I have conditions." He sat. "Camille and I keep our own schedule. She goes to her school. Her life does not change structurally." I looked at him steadily. "I am your mother's companion. I'm not a household employee. The care decisions remain mine and Dr. Annan's. If something changes medically, I tell you plainly and you listen without overriding me." "Yes," he said. "If at any point I decide it's not working, I leave. No contract, no leverage." "Yes. And you find a way to get Camille's sneakers replaced before we have this conversation again." A pause. And then, the real smile, the one I had not seen before, the one that had nothing to do with power or management or the careful presentation of a man who had too much to lose. "There's a car available," he said. "Today, if you want." I called Mrs. Petrov from the hallway. I called the pharmacy to adjust my schedule. Then I stood in the corridor of his house for a moment, looking at the floor, and thought about my mother dying alone in a ward like the one I'd just come from. Thought about what I'd wanted to give her that I hadn't been able to. I went back into the library. "We'll try it for the month," I said, "and we'll see." He nodded. And when I looked at him, honestly, in good light, I noticed that he looked like someone who had just been handed something he'd stopped asking for. "The room is ready," he said. "Camille's too. There's a window." 7 months later, Juliana Maranzano died at home, in a bed she recognized, with the window open. It was an April morning. The light came in off the river, pale and clean, and I was in the chair beside her, and she was talking. She talked until very close to the end, which is what she had wanted, about the festival of the obelisks in Nola. The way they carry the wooden towers through the streets on the feast of San Paolino, the noise and the color and the smell of her mother's kitchen afterward. Camille was in school. I had made sure of that. Some things children should be protected from, and some things they should witness, and the particular piece of a person leaving well belongs to the first category. Silvio was there. He held his mother's hand and did not cry, which is what she had asked of him specifically, in the way of Neapolitan women who know what they are asking. He was there when it was over, and afterward he sat for a long time in the chair on the other side, and we didn't speak, which was right. Mace the threat, Ferrante and the operation that had tried to use an 81-year-old woman as leverage had been resolved in the weeks after the pharmacist was removed. I didn't ask how. I had made a decision some time ago about which questions were mine to ask, and which belonged to a world I was adjacent to but not inside, and I kept that line with intention. What I knew: Domenico Vita did not return to work at any hospital I could find. Marco the orderly transferred again, this time to somewhere no nursing database recorded. And Silvio Maranzano's operations, which I understood only in outline, had stabilized in ways the careful silence of his associates confirmed without stating. Camille had, by February, decided that the large, serious man who sometimes ate breakfast in the kitchen was actually very good at drawing horses, which Silvio bore with what I can only describe as genuine pleasure. His son Matteo had, by March, taught Camille how to play chess. She was apparently alarmingly good at it, which surprised no one who knew her mother. My pharmacy shifts became occasional. I kept them because they were mine, because the woman I had been, the one who watched the bank app show $31.07 and still got on the bus to sit with other people's dying, was not someone I wanted to lose track of. Silvio understood this. I had told him directly in the library 6 weeks after Giuliana's death that I was not interested in being installed. He had said without hesitation, "I know. That's the part I'm not interested in losing." It began, if it began anywhere, with a woman who refused to extend her arm for a blood pressure cuff and then did, maybe because someone had arrived from 40 kilometers away and hadn't needed anything from her. I hadn't known then that the woman in the bed would teach me what I'd been trying to give my own mother. Hadn't known that the room by the river would come to feel like a place I was supposed to be. Giuliana had known. She had looked at me on the first night and said, "Come back tomorrow," with the settled certainty of a woman who had already decided and had been right about most things that mattered. I still take that seriously. The volunteer who could not afford the cab home became the woman who held someone's mother's hand at the end. She never stopped taking the bus. Some things you keep not because you have to, but because they remind you who you are.